Lecture 11, Part 2. Pretty much covered all this, but there was one slide I wanted to show you, or one picture. Go back through. This guy's Norman Thomas. He's a socialist leader at the time. And I told you one of the controversies about Roosevelt is, did he start us on the road down to socialistic America? Norman Thomas was an actual socialist. Somebody said something to him about, Roosevelt's carrying out the socialist agenda. And he says, yeah, on a stretcher. What does that mean? Well, hopefully by the end of this lecture, it'll start to make some sense. Slide. So at his inauguration, Roosevelt said something to the effect of, all we have, I think this was at his inauguration, he said, all we have to fear is fear itself. Seems appropriate in today's trying times. Well, let's get on with the New Deal. Okay. So the New Deal is usually divided into two waves. This is kind of an artificial thing done for logical reasons by historians, but I'm sure that Roosevelt at the time didn't say this is the first New Deal because they wouldn't have known there was a second one coming. But when Roosevelt wins the election of 1932, he would have taken office March 4th of 1933, unless March 4th was a Sunday, then they would have moved it. And the first thing he has to deal with is the banking crisis. Now, you probably read about this in the book, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but banks have been folding up like crazy. They had lent money to people to buy stocks. People had bought, and there's other things too, but people had bought stocks and then lost their money in the crash, couldn't pay back the bank. Some of the banks had lent too much money. They did not have enough in reserve. Some of the banks go bankrupt. And of course, the bank goes bankrupt, your savings in the bank are gone. Okay. So, excuse me. The banking system was in really bad shape. Okay. People lose their jobs. They can't pay their mortgage. Can't pay their mortgage. Then the bank's stuck, either foreclosing on your house. Now they've got a house that they're stuck with. Okay. Banks are like just collapsing. Okay. So this is one of the first things Roosevelt has to deal with. So when Roosevelt takes office, like his first major action, like on day one, after where's the paper clips and the pen, he signs. I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. He declares a bank holiday. Now he had the power to do this under this some law that was left over from World War I. Okay. So he gets into office. And he declares a bank holiday. Basically what he does is tells the banks they have to close for, I think it was 3 days, maybe later turned into 4. So, about not an entire business week. Okay? All the banks shut down. Okay? And then while they're doing this, Congress is passing this Emergency Banking Act. Because remember, Roosevelt's elected in November. He doesn't take office till March. They've had time to come up with ideas and get legislation ready to go. And so they pass this Emergency Banking Act. Basically, here's how this is going to work. So here's what they're going to do during this bank holiday. The government is going to send auditors around to the banks. They'll check the banks. Okay, see how good a shape they're in. Because people have been scared of leaving their money in the bank because you might lose this. Here's how it works. You have all your money in the First Bank of Rockwall. Okay. Actually, you have all your money in the Second Bank of Rockwall. But you go home one day and your neighbor's sitting there on the porch crying his eyes out. And you go over and you say, Fred, what happened? Why are you so upset? And Fred looks at you and says, I had my life savings in the First National Bank of Rockwall, and they've gone bankrupt. I've lost everything. I'm destitute. He's horribly depressed. And then you start going, man, I wonder if my money is safe in the Second Bank of Rockwall. And you start to panic. So maybe you go down to the bank and you pull your money out. Well, if everybody shows up at the bank at the same time to pull their money out, the bank doesn't have that much money. They've lent it out. Okay? You see this in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. There's a run on the Bailey Savings and Loan. That's kind of how it works. Okay? Everybody's panicked trying to take their money. out. Uh, so banks are folding up. So the government closes the banks for a number of days. They send auditors around to check the books. If your bank is in really bad financial shape, it might not reopen. The government might deem it needs to be closed. If your bank looks sound, it'll be reopened. Okay? Then there might be some banks in the middle. Maybe there's some banks that are, maybe they're in okay shape that could use a little bit of money to kind of get past the crisis. They can arrange to get a loan from the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Okay? So Reconstruction Finance Corporation is actually left over from the tail end of the Hoover administration. Remember I told you Hoover was looking for ways to help businesses. Okay, so the Reconstruction Finance Corporation is not a New Deal agency because it predates Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But the way the Reconstruction Finance Corporation worked was if your business needed some money to just maybe make payroll, you could make a case to the Reconstruction Finance Corp if you had a good business model. You go in there and say, hey, look, times have been tough, but I've got a contract to make 50,000 widgets. I just need some money to get the machine to do it with. They might give you a loan. So the Reconstruction Finance Corporation will help prop up some of the weaker banks. Okay. Now, here's one of the things Roosevelt's famous for. Should be on the next slide. Okay. He's noted for what they call the fireside chat. Roosevelt would go on the radio. There's no television back then. Goes on the radio and explains to the people what's going on. He becomes famous for this. And what he tells everybody is, look, the banks are closed now, but when the banks reopen, if your bank reopens, it's been checked over by the government. It's solid. Okay? And he's trying to restore people's confidence in the banks. So, when the holiday's over and banks reopen, those that aren't closed permanently, then maybe you're tempted to go, well, you know what? I have all that money stored in a can in the closet because I was scared of it being in the bank. Well, what if the house burns? So, maybe you'll start taking money back to the bank. Okay? So, and then if the banks have money, they can loan people money to buy things. And so Roosevelt helps, well, not Roosevelt, Congress gets this thing through at his urging, helps stabilize the private banking system. Okay? Now, also as part of this, you get some banking reform. Remember, I told you there's 3 R's: relief, recovery, reform. You get something called the FDIC. That's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Now, this is basically banks pay money into an insurance fund that the government administers. Okay, if a bank were to go bankrupt or belly up, the government insurance company will guarantee the deposits of these of the depositors up to a certain amount. I believe originally it was only about $5,000, but that was a lot of money back then. Nowadays, I think it's like $250,000. So the next time you go to the bank, if any of you actually go to the bank anymore, but if you actually go into the bank for some reason, you need to pick up some checks, or no one uses checks, but Grandma sent you a check for Christmas, and you decide to actually walk in and deposit it because the ATM's broken. Look near the door. There should be a sticker or a sign that says FDIC. And what that tells you is that your money is insured at this bank up to the limits of the insurance policy. Okay? This is to give people confidence that they can keep their money in the banks. Now, the FDIC is still with us today, and occasionally it actually goes into action. During the last fiscal crisis back in 2008, there were some banks that were closed down by the government, and then you have your money in Fred's bank, and you go down one day, and Fred's bank is gone. The building is still there, but it turns out Fred, was cleaning out the books and took off to Rio de Janeiro with his secretary and cleaned out the vault. But now there's a sign: the bank is now owned by Chase. The government has, foreclosed on the bank. paid off the insurers, sold the bank to a solvent bank, etc. So the FDIC is still with us today. Yeah. Now, here's a perfect example of some of the contradictions with Roosevelt. Some people say Roosevelt, he's a big socialist, big government, etc., etc. And there's some reasons why people say these kind of things. But here's the flip side of it. Presented with a financial crisis, what Roosevelt and Congress has done here, remember all this has to come through Congress, if the administration can ask for it. What they've done is found a way to save the private banking system. Now things are really bad shape right now. Maybe you could have come up with the idea of nationalizing the banks, with the government taking over the banks and operating them for the benefit of the people, which would be actual socialism. So, people who say that Roosevelt is just like a screaming communist, uh, sometimes people will point to this. Well, when it came down to it, he didn't try to nationalize the banks. He found a way to protect and save the capitalistic private banking system. Yeah. Now, here's the question. Would he have nationalized them if he thought he could? I don't know. Maybe he would have. Never met the man. Died before I was born. So did he do the least amount he could to save the banks without destroying the system, to keep the capitalistic system intact? Or did he do as much as he thought he could get away with because he knew he couldn't get, nationalizing banks through the system? I don't honestly know. This is one of the problems about Roosevelt. He's a really tough nut to crack. He never wrote any memoirs. There's these polarizing opinions of him, and I've spent years, studying history, and I still don't really know quite what to make of this guy. Right? And that's, like I said, he's a very controversial figure, even today. But anyway, they've been in office just, a week. They've passed this banking bill. They've stabilized the banking system, and slowly but surely, people start, returning money to the banks. And don't get me wrong, the depression's not over, but it kind of helps keep everybody from, the banks that were still in business that hadn't gone bankrupt, helps stabilize them and protect people's money. So we'll cut to a new video and go to the next slide.